first thing we're going to do is create this really simple body shape for our hedgehog. And all you will need any type of mat, whether it be a wool mat, a foam mat, a rice-filled hessian mat. It really doesn't matter. Use a topper, especially when you're flat felting, because that protection mat makes it last an awful lot longer. I am going to be using my trusty barbecue skewer, probably just to shape the nose, but I will see. I have just got a 38 standard good all-rounder needle here, and then a 40 for some fine detail. And if I find that I need a 42 for even finer detail, I'll use that, but we'll see. And then if you have one, you can use a multi-tool, but it's not necessary. And then just some little scissors for trimming. So the first thing I'm going to work on is this body shape. And it's like a little barrel, but it's flat at the base. And I am going to use a core wool just because it's cheaper to use for the body. And then I'll probably just cover it in a nice thin layer of this beautiful oatmeal, because I think I'm going to go for a light hedgehog face and body this time, just to do something different.
So clearly this is sped up, it's a time lapse, so I'm just going to give you the broad strokes rather than every single poke. But if you want the full real-time version with me explaining as I go, that's linked below for you. Everything I make starts with a shape, and for the body we're working with a simple barrel shape, flat across the base so he can actually sit once he's finished. I always teach in shapes when I'm running my courses, because once you start seeing animals as a collection of simple shapes rather than one overwhelming thing, the whole process gets so much less daunting. And a barrel for the body is just about as straightforward as it gets. But use any wool you've got to hand. The head's next, and that's a cone shape built around a barbecue skewer, which genuinely is one of the handiest tools you'll ever pick up for this craft. I start by wrapping the wool around the middle of the skewer, keeping my fingers close in and the wool nice and flat, and turning it slightly diagonally as I move it backwards and forwards along the length. The skewer really is the one tool I'd say you absolutely must have for this kind of project. It makes such a difference to how quickly and neatly a cone like this does come together. If you've got a template, you can even mark a little line on the skewer first so you know exactly how far to build, since hedgehog noses want to be quite long before they taper down into that cone. And if you've got an image of a hedgehog in front of you, or any animal really, whatever you're working on, it's worth checking proportions against it as you go, because getting that length roughly right early on saves you having to compensate later. And if you have a template with a size guide on it, even better. It just helps keep everything in proportion as you build. If the wool feels too thick at any point, just split it down the middle rather than fighting with it. And keep what's at the very back loose, because that's what you're going to attach to the body later. If you end up with more wool on there than you need, just pull some off and split it rather than wrestling. Go straight in and out with the needle, never bending it because the wool moves in whichever direction you're pointing, and keep moving around the shape rather than felting in one spot, or you'll flatten it. Once it's firm enough to take its own weight, take it off the skewer. You don't want it collapsing, and we want it firm enough so that we can add detail later and still felt it onto the body without it losing that shape. From here, it's about widening the base so it'll sit nicely once it joins the body, moving between needles as I go. A 38 for the sturdy bulk of it, or a 40 if you have one for finer detail, and only reaching for a really fine 42 at the end, but you probably won't need that since the gauge is so fine and it will snap if you push too hard. Keep wrapping the fresh wool round, working diagonally, swap direction now and then so you don't end up with a ridge down one side. Push the needle right through to the centre too, so nothing stays soft in the middle. You'll get the odd wisps of wool poking out through the other side as you go. That's just called bearding, and a few taps sorts it straight out. Once it's off the skewer, you can just continue to shape. So you've got a really, really nice point to that nose. Everything's nice and firm. There's nothing loose in the middle. And you're just preparing that to be attached to the body. And remember, keep that end loose that is actually going to be attached to the main part of the body. Before joining the head to the body though, I had a thin coat of the feature colour all over the body so it matches once everything's together. I'm using this lovely warm oatmeal shade, sometimes called dark fawn, which I tend to get from World of Wool. The most wool suppliers will have something similar. Most of this is going to be hidden under embellishment later anyway, so there's no need to be precious about it. I just spread it out thin with my fingers first before laying it over the body, then work on it diagonally as I move around with a finer needle. Attaching the head to the body is all about making the two shapes look like one. So I lay strips of wool across the join, overlapping the nose and the body, and work it in from both sides so that there's no visible line where one stops and the other starts. If your nose has ended up a bit longer than you'd like, and mine usually does, this is also the point where you can shorten it, pushing the needle straight through where the head meets the body, pulls those fibres in and tightens everything up at the same time. So a slightly too long nose is honestly nothing to worry about. I'm also building up extra wool right at that join, layering it between the two shapes so that the transition gets wider and more gradual rather than a sudden step from one to the other. And then any obvious line that's still showing can be covered with a tiny wisp of matching wool felted straight over the top. The trick to blend in any seam like this is paying attention to which way you're pushing the needle because the wool moves in that direction. Push one way and you'll get a ridge, so I keep swapping sides as I go around, working the wool down towards the nose on one pass and back upwards towards the body on the next. It's worth rolling the whole shape in your hands now and then too, which smooths everything out and helps it to lengthen slightly if it needs it. Once this is done, you genuinely can't tell there were ever two separate pieces, and that blending is honestly the bit that turns a rough shape into something that actually looks like a hedgehog. Now to the nose tip, which I do by blending a touch of black or very dark brown with a slightly lighter shade so it's not a completely flat colour. Then work that in with the finer needle, going gently over the top layer until any lumps smooth out. I usually use a 40 needle for that to get it roughly in place, and then just keep going, gently tapping until any stray fibres disappear and the surface looks properly smooth rather than patchy. You only need a tiny amount of wool for this, and you'll likely go over it 2 or 3 times before it sits right, or even pull it off and start again, which is completely normal whether you've been doing this for years or you're brand new to it. I usually roll it slightly between my fingers first just to mat it a touch, but you don't have to. Once it's pressed on and you've felted it, it will stay in place, and you can do that whilst it's actually on the tip of the nose. Before the eyes go in, there's a small spiky collar that sits just behind the face, blended from a couple of colours so it's not just one flat shade. You could go bolder here too. A much darker shade against the body colour will make that collar stand out even more if that's the look you're after. I do this by folding a strip of wool over, felt it into place, then snip into the fold to give it that spiky look. It looks lovely on its own, but it's really there to give you a clear marker for exactly where those eyes should sit. And once you can see roughly where it is, the rest of the face starts falling into place around it. There's barely any wool needed for the eyes, and we're talking a fraction of a gram between both eyes, so don't be tempted to use more than the tiniest pinch. I blend a touch of dark, a hint of mid-brown so they're not pure black, rolled into little points and pressed in with a finer needle. I'll often make a small indentation with my finger first just to mark exactly where each eye is going to sit, or you could use a dress pin, which helps keep them level and stops you guessing at placement. I often like to add a little bit of dimension above the eyes, so I create a little eyebrow, and it's really, really easy. You just create a tiny seed shape, similar colour to the face in this case, and I pop that above the eye, and that will just disappear, but it does just give it a little bit of height and life. And then we need to add the little highlights for the eyes, and you need the tiniest piece of white or very light wool for this, and put them in the same place for each eye, otherwise it ends up looking a little bit cross-eyed. But remember, less is more with this. It's the tiniest amount, and you'll probably take it out and do it again, take it out and do it again. We all do that, even if we're experienced needle felters. And if you feel confident enough, you can add a few little lines under the eye just with a slightly darker wool. And it just adds more life, but you don't have to, and it just depends on your skill level. We're now ready to work onto the ears, and I do this by folding a length of wool over, twist the loose end at the bottom for attaching later, and you've got a petal shape ready to refine. I then run the needle around the edge first, then draw a line into the wool, and then pull that wool on the outside towards it and felt it down with a needle. Just makes the ears look really nicely finished. You don't have to chase down any stray wisps afterwards. And then you can use a punch tool as well. That will speed up the whole thing no end if you've got one. It's not necessary though. It's worth using a final needle for the shaping itself rather than your sturdiest one, since a robust needle tends to just sort of dent the wool rather than reduce it, while a finer needle deals with the surface fibres properly. And also you can pop your ear into a scrap of folded cardboard while you work the edges, and that helps, giving you something firm to felt against for a really crisp outline, and it protects your fingers. And no, I've made these ears too big, but I'm hoping that since it's going to go around the face later, that I'll be able to just pull it in to the head whilst I felt and reduce that size. And also I do want them slightly bigger because I don't want them to get lost with all the details that I'm going to be adding. And you can also use the first ear as a guide for the second, so it keeps them matching sizes and you'll know they're firm enough to attach once they come away from the mat easily. All the fibres are interlocked rather than clinging on. And you just continue to felt and shape until they are nice and flat and pretty equal, but that's not really too important. They can be slightly different sizes. Don't worry about that at all. We then just attach them in line with the eyes and felt them firmly into place so they sit at the right angle rather than just flopping about. If an ear ends up sitting a bit too far down the side of the face once it's attached, working through from the back with your needle, I'll just pull it up and shorten it slightly. The same trick that worked for adjusting the nose earlier. Where the ears meet the head, you'll often get an obvious seam, and that's where a reverse felting needle earns its keep. Rather than just pushing wool in, it pulls wool out, loosening the fibres just enough to soften that joint completely. It's such a simple little tool to use, but makes a really big difference. And it's often the tool that needle felters don't have. So yes, definitely get yourself a reverse felting needle. So we are now ready for the curls and colour across the back, and it's generally the best part of the whole project. It's a slower part of the process in some parts, but honestly my favourite. There's something really satisfying about watching all that colour build up. I'm using a lovely curly Gotland wool for the base layer, properly, really silky. And I'm just taking small lengths at a time, running my fingers through one end to loosen it slightly so you get a mix of proper curls and fluffier wisps rather than one flat texture all over. And it wants to come at least halfway down the side. You do still want to see some of that lovely body colour showing. And once that top coat's down, we're ready to start adding these lovely pops of autumn colours. I've got greens, oranges, reds here. I know you can get those realistic hedgehog spikes, but for me, this is just so much more fun, sort of creating it from scratch. It's entirely up to you how much you add here. You can just stick with the grey and white if you wanted something a bit more understated, or go heavier on the colour the way I have. There's no wrong way to do it. And then that little spiky crown at the front gets finished by snipping into the curls and twisting each strand between your fingers, or twizzling it as I generally end up calling it, until you've got proper spikes rather than a flat mat of wool. And it doesn't matter if some are longer than the others, but if you want to, you can just trim those down with your needle. And you don't have to have the spikes, but wow, they do look gorgeous. And lastly, for the face, you can go at it again with that reverse felting needle to fluff it up and just give it a really nice soft finish. Not necessary, but I just love this needle. And especially if your seams are not quite neat enough, or you're just starting and building up your confidence, it really does cover a multitude of sins. A brilliant tool. As I said before, definitely get one for your felting toolkit. I hope you are feeling really inspired by this tutorial so far, and if you are, or if you have any questions, just pop them in the comments below. I'll always get back to you. And I'll also pop lots of useful links in the description for you. Now, because this is a proper autumn project, I want to finish it with a leaf or two using exactly the same petal shapes as we did for the ears. Again, classic shapes in needle felting, really important, and use them for so many things. And they're just going to be blended through with warmer colours of browns, reds and oranges. A thin wisp of contrasting shade pulled gently down the middle gives you a vein, and the tip gets twisted the same way as before. I add them in odd numbers because that's just what looks right to my eye. I like odd numbers across the board, really. Leaves, acorns, even the little pops of colour in the curls earlier. It just feels more natural than anything too symmetrical. Blend in whatever autumn scraps you've got going, stack together in the same direction, twizzle one end the same you did as for the ears, and then form that point. Draw your usual outline, bring the loose wool in towards it the same way you did earlier. And firm leaves are much easier to shape than soft ones, so don't be afraid to really felt them well before refining the point. And I mentioned shapes previously, and again, this is the petal shape, another, or a teardrop shape, it depends, I call them both, and it's a classic shape. It's what every needle felter should know. There are 6 shapes. You've used 3 of them in this project alone, so you've got your petal, you've got your cone, and you've got your barrel, and those shapes you will use across nearly all of your needle felting projects. the same shapes that I teach on my beginner's needle felting course over on the Felt Hub. Again, I'll pop the link in the description or in the comments for that. And my finishing touch is a cheeky little acorn. Hope you love this tutorial as much as I did making it. Pop your questions in the comments, and thanks so much for felting along with me. It's been a joy as always.